What's happening, Nightgod family? Hope y'all are doing well on this fine evening. I'm not gonna lie, I have some awesome content for y'all today. So you're gonna want to stick around because some secrets are about to be revealed. I am a mythologist. I have seen giants, and they are now among us. I am a mythologist. It was a profession passed down from generation to generation, and I've always been interested in it. The old tales my dad used to tell me about fairies, cyclops, and big giant wolves always had me on edge. There was something he never spoke about, however. That was giants. Whenever I brought up the giants, he would clearly change from cheerful to stone cold, even fearful at times. One night, my dad came home drunk. I could smell the whiskey on his breath from 10 feet away. He was clearly in a state of panic, as the only detail I remember vividly were his big eyes. They were almost black. When it was time for me to sleep, I asked him for some tales, and no matter how mad he was, he always told me something I had never heard of. I missed those times. He was telling me a story about an ancient fairy garden that produces dreams when I brought up giants. Without a single word, he switched out the lights and left my room, leaving me to soak in the eeriness of if he was mad or not. When Dad left, I was around 16. He one day went on a journey to Ireland because they found evidence of something. I don't know exactly what it was, but his notes suggested it was something to do with angels. There were very detailed illustrations of them and how they looked, and it was completely different to what I could have expected an angel to look like. It had more than two legs. Wings were small, like a baby bird's, but the most striking details were the eyes. They had the same big black eyes, like the night my father had when he was drunk. I felt uncomfortable looking at it. When I got out of college, I had a degree in mythology. I had a few friends who were interested, but most either became something else or a partner in the field, like archaeology. One night, while at home, I was doing some research when I got a call from one of these friends. I'll call him Troy. He was clearly frantic, as if he was in a hurry. And that's when he asked me for help. Apparently, on one of the digs, they had found evidence of something that needed to be identified. My first and most obvious question was, why would you need a mythologist for that? He avoided it and said they could fly me out tomorrow. This was in Afghanistan, but it was in a more remote or desolated area of it. Since this was the case, I wasn't too fearful of any potential threats, and after some time of thinking, I agreed, and I was flown out in time no less than when the sun had fully rose the next morning. When I stepped onto the dry, sandy landscape of the country, I was shocked. The sun was blazing so hot it felt like I would be reduced to ash. I felt uncomfortable, and I moved to the spot where I was meant to be picked up. When the pickup arrived, I hopped in, and after a few hours of treacherous heat and sandy roads, we finally arrived to a very large dig site. There were scientists, journalists, but most confusing of all, there were armed guards. As I shuffled over, Troy greeted me with a tight hug and gestured for me to follow him, so I did. We walked into one of the many research tents, and there were very old illustrations, books, and more. But the one thing that caught my eye was a bottle that was waxed shut with a rolled up piece of paper inside. I looked at it, and he caught my gaze and explained. Yeah, we found that at the site. We think it might be a codex or a dating. If we are right and able to figure out what it says, it could change quite a lot about the history of this place. All the things we wondered could now be proven. Then I asked the burning question. Why do you need me then? A massive lump formed in his throat as he walked out, me trailing closely behind. When we arrived to the main attraction, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In this big, rectangular-like hole stood a skeleton. This skeleton was no less than 12 feet tall and almost 5 feet wide. I almost thought this was a joke or an animal, till I saw the very clearly blue oxidized copper spear and massive iron brace in with the skeleton. Then flashed in my mind the memories of my father's avoidance to talk about the giants. As a mythologist, you don't actually think any of this is possible. It's mostly just cultural study. By the time I had looked at this thing long enough, it was very dark, around 11 p.m., so we all headed to bed. The only thing I remember thinking is, was this real? Have we found evidence of giants? And so I passed out in the pool of my own thoughts. When I awoke, I had heard lots of commotion, and most confusingly, the sounds of guns being loaded. I sprung out of bed, rushing to see that the skeleton had disappeared. But even worse, so had Troy. He was absolutely nowhere to be seen. I heard people talking, then spotted a crowd up ahead, so I followed. When I stood to see what they saw, I was shocked. There were massive trails of clear drag marks, but also there were footprints, at least 4 feet in length. The drag marks led into a valley of mounds, and so we planned to follow them. Our main thought was that Troy had taken the body and planned to sell it. When I went into his tent, everything was clearly, frantically thrown around, as if he had scampered to get out of bed quickly. But also, the bottle with the message was gone. I caught up with the group, and as we followed the trails, I started to become anxious, fearful even. Something about this wasn't right. How could he have moved that massive skeleton out of that pit and not have made any noise? Nevertheless, the weight of it, the spear and the brace was also gone. How was any of this possible? When the trail started to shift, it went up a ramp like slope into the top portions of these mounds. They were around 100 to 500 meters tall. When we followed them, we arrived at a cave, and without any hesitation, the group shuffled in. I stood there in shock, but before I could think, my legs did for me, and I moved in. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It was rancid, worse than death. But the second thing was the darkness. I had a torch with me, but before I lit it, I felt helpless. If I got lost in there without a torch, I would never make it out. I would be forced to die slowly, constricted by only the boundaries of these rocky walls. When I lit the room, I saw the group was a bit ahead, so I jogged to catch up. When I hit a loose rock, and it bounced into the wall, making a loud echo. Then we heard it. Loud, heavy footsteps came from right in front of the group. The first thought was a wild animal, and so a lot of us rushed out. When we made it, we heard yelling and screaming. Then the noise started, the muffle, till it all stopped. Among the eerie silence, we heard what sounded like something eating, a predator feeding on its prey. One of the many armed guards quickly loaded his rifle, and the sounds suddenly stopped again. The footsteps, slow this time, came towards us, and the guards immediately pulled their weapons up, waiting. Then slowly formed out of the darkness a massive shape of a human. From even that, I could tell it was at least 15 feet, maybe more. Then it emerged. From that cave, a massive axe swung out, striking one of the guards in the body, sending him off the mountain. There were no screams. He was gone instantly. The enormous figure emerged, and what I saw will be engraved in my memory as if etched in stone. It stood tall, almost 20 feet. Its skin was a pale, stark gray, and its features were strict. It had black hair, deep eyes sunken into its head, far more than naturally should. Its nose was slightly cut off, and it had horrendous scars on its face. But its mouth is what I remembered the most. It had a grin with thousands of tiny, razor-sharp teeth, and there were blood on them. It was primal, a supernatural being that should not have existed. Outlining his body were bones. He used rags to tie them onto him. It was wearing the skeleton of what we had extracted, as if it was a trophy. But what still gives me nightmares today was what hung off its body. There were twin ropes with parts mounted on them like trophies. They were his friends. The guards opened fire on the beast as it let out a deep, guttural roar, almost like the screech of metal. I watched as it grabbed the closest person, one of the guards, and without any trouble, the beast squeezed. The guard turned to nothing. For that brief moment, it was distracted, so I ran beneath its feet as it dropped his lifeless body to the ground. I ran and ran till I found where it had been hiding. There was a small cavern, and there stood a bunch of dead grass, sticks, and the like. I didn't know how this thing got grass in the middle of Afghanistan, but I didn't care. As I scanned his lair with my torch, I spotted it. The bottle, with the wax sealing it closed and the letter inside. It was easy to break, and I figured, in my last moments, I would read it. This is what it read. To those who happen to find this, I am dead. I am not the body of the monster that has been found. I am rather the man by the name of Lucas Hitchwood. What you have dug up is a giant, a massive beast that resides in all places, but is mostly considered fantasy. Lucas Hitchwood was my father's name. The note was smeared in ink and was clearly written in a hurry. I looked at the bottle and noticed something. Of course, it was an old whiskey bottle. Everything finally clicked. He never went to Ireland. He went here. He knew they existed. As I said this more, gunshots echoed and screams emanated from the pitch dark my torch couldn't illuminate. In a hurry, I ran to a wall and saw something shiny. There was a watch, a silver watch, which I recognized. It was my father's. I saw bones scattered and I realized he had died here. I sobbed like a baby till the shots stopped. I thought it was coming back, then I heard my name being called. I rushed out to see the beast had fallen dead. Its eyes lay open to reveal the same dark sunken voids I had seen just moments ago. That was the last I remembered, the black voids of that thing's eyes. Then I passed out. I woke in the hospital and was told I had suffered from intense stress, which caused the fainting. As the nurse walked out, 2 men in suits walked in. I had heard of this, the men in black. What you saw that day is something that very few have ever seen. We have contacted who you work for and have managed to get you a sum of money in exchange for your sworn secrecy. A contract will be provided for this soon. I was paid $300,000 to be quiet. I was never to speak about the horrors I witnessed that day. Now, when I walk around the streets, I notice more black eyes staring at me. It's not long before I join my dad. The stress has been too much. I'm considering just giving up and leaving this world in peace. Check out these massive swords unearthed in Turkey. Now, I'm not sure if this is AI or not. I haven't seen anything necessarily debunking it, but I haven't seen any mainstream news on it either. But you know how this stuff goes when it comes to giants. They generally don't put it in the mainstream media. Check these out. Allegedly 3,000 years old. And these things are huge. As you can see, they dwarf the archaeologists digging them up. And they're said to be Nephilim swords. Now, I did some research and I asked ChatGPT about what size sword a 6-foot-tall man would need. And on average, swords in medieval times were about half of a man's height. Then I asked ChatGPT, based on these pictures, how big are these swords? And this is what is said. The image you provided appears to show an extremely large sword, far larger than typical swords from any historical period. The approximate length based on the image, we need to consider the scale provided by the person in the photo. If the person in the photo is around average height, 5'5" to 6 feet tall, the sword seems to be around 4 times their height, making it roughly 20 to 24 feet long. To the next sword, and it said that one was 40 to 50 feet long. So if you do the math on that, half the height, these beings that wielded these swords had to have been anywhere from 75 to 100 feet tall. Just know, if these are real, you'll never see it in the mainstream media. It will not hit the mainstream media. If they actually did uncover these swords, what else would they be used for other than a being wielding them? I don't see ancient beings just carving or making random weaponry that large for no reason at all. Why would they do that? It's so labor intensive. It's a waste of resources. It just doesn't make sense. The only logical explanation is that there were beings big enough to wield these swords. Could it have been the Nephilim from the Book of Enoch? Possibly. Could it have been beings even older than that? Possibly. Poseidon, the Greek gods, something along those lines. Could they have been real beings? I'm not saying it's the case. I'm just saying ponder it. It's absolutely amazing if it's a real find. Y'all ain't gonna believe this one. A giant spotted in Thailand. TikToker Bao Udana posted this video. And for some reason, it hasn't gone viral at all. But I believe it's no doubt authentic. His page literally tells the story. He only has 2,800 followers. Probably most of them came from that video. And if you go through his feed, he simply posts his everyday life at home. And once in a while, he posts himself with filters. That's it. So as far as the validity and authenticity of the video, I believe it's 100% real. And when you watch it for yourself, listen to them in the background, their amazement, it seems absolutely genuine. So when you watch this video, pay close attention. At first, the being doesn't move very much at all, but then you'll see it move its arm and then kind of slightly hunch over. And after that, it does something that I can't quite tell what it is. It almost reminds me of, I don't even want to say it, a shapeshifter. But enough babbling, check it out, folks. Here, I've went ahead and zoomed in for you and stabilized the image so that you can get a better look at it. In the next one, I'll zoom in even further. But this is some really good, gotta be 15 feet tall, 20. You can see its movements. Hunches over, its stature, then literally crawls away. It lifted its hands up, almost as if it's praying, as if it's thanking a god. And then, I don't know what it does right there, fam. It's wild. Alright, y'all. In this video, I zoomed it in as far as I could. You can see, it almost looks like he's kneeling down, y'all. He's on his knees. You can see he has a belly. You can see his long arms. His hair is dark. You can see him moving his hands, almost as if he's praying. Then he kneels over. If he is on his knees, this being has got to be 30 feet tall all day long. What makes this sighting even more fascinating is that Thailand is actually rich with giant legend and folklore. And if you've done any research at all on giants in this planet, you've seen this picture. The picture of a 6.5 meter tall giant that has a massive snake wrapped around it. And it looks as though they were fighting to the death. Now, according to Snopes, fact checker, this was just an art exhibit. But I did a little more digging and actually found a news report based in Thailand where a woman says that they found this in the Krabi province. And based on the news report, they act like it was dug up by archaeologists and it was a legit excavation, that it's not fake, but take it for what you will. And legend has it that in this region, there was a Krabi giant and a Naga, which is a giant snake. And both of them fell in love with Princess Phranang, the goddess of the sea. As a result, they fought each other to the death, but both of them losing their lives. It's said that they ended up being the mountains that flank the Krabi River, which is almost exactly where this was found. This discovery, along with the discovery of other larger animal bones, was found in the Khao Kham cave. And if you ever go to Thailand, you can actually visit this and see it to this day. It is a tourist attraction. Again, from what I've read and studied from news articles from Thailand and news reports, that it's actually authentic. It's a real giant. Now, I'm not saying that for sure. They could just be doing that to bring tourism, but you never know. Then you have the Sahasdesha and the Ravana in Wat Arun, which is the Temple of the Dawn in Bangkok. The giants and the Ravana are based on characters from the Ramayana. Forgive me if I murdered that. They are depicted standing guard at the temple, symbolizing the protection of the sacred site. The legend of the Tatayan, or Titan, neighborhood where the Temple of the Sun is located further embellishes the roles, incorporating local folklore and Buddhist teachings. They look very intimidating. They have fangs and they have masks, but they are gentle giants. That's one thing about Thai folklore. They want you to not judge a book by its cover. And those are just a couple of the legends of giants in Thailand. They go way back, millions of years. Now that you've seen that, I noticed that it looks like this being has a belly, he's thick, and in other portions, you can almost see a little like ponytail coming off his head, right? A while back, probably a year ago, a follower sent me some coordinates to a being in South America. And that being completely reminds me of this giant. All right, y'all, check it out. It's at damn near the southernmost tip of South America, which is crazy because on the Monte Urbano map, it's called the Land of the Giants. This being reminds me a lot of the being in Thailand. You can see he's very dark, like the Moors. Probably Tartarian descendant, but he's got a slight ponytail, maybe dressed up in tribal. You can see his belly. And this guy looks to be 42 feet tall. Now, It is Google Earth. I understand that. You can take it with a grain of salt if you want. But once you zoom in, you can see he's almost looking up at the sky, at the sun. Has tribal on. Crazy stuff. So again, this is some of the most legit footage I've ever seen of a giant caught on film. Yes, it is just a shadow. You don't get to see it in detail, but you get the idea. This thing is huge. If you look comparably to the trees around it, it's a massive being. And it's moving. It's legit. Wild, y'all. One of the craziest videos I've ever seen of giants. You can see right here his head, his belly. He's on his knees. And he's still 10 to 15 feet tall. He's got to be a 20 plus foot tall being. Wild, fam. Wild. But of course, you know, this is for entertainment purposes only. May or may not be true. Could be total CGI. You never know. I just had to share this one. It's of a couple giants that people caught on film in the mountains. And one of them is huge, y'all. I'm talking, he gotta be 30 to 40 feet tall. Check it out. Let me know in the comments what y'all think. The first one. This is in North Country. I want to say maybe Canada. You can see, whatever that is, it's tall in relation to that mountain. The gentleman was driving. Well, he was a passenger with his buddy. His buddy was driving, and his buddy wouldn't pull over. Now this one, y'all, I'm pretty sure it's in Mexico. Here it's hunched over. Give it a second. Look at how tall he is. That is a 30 to 40 foot giant. It's got to be. Here's the rest of the video. Massive. I mean, that thing is huge. You can literally see it walking around. Look at that. They're starting to show themselves. I was just talking to a good buddy of mine. He's a great source. Talked to his cousin in Mexico. And there's an older lady that's supposedly in communication regularly with these giants because she speaks the language of old. It's the Nahuatl language. Ancient Aztec type language. That's what they speak. I'm going to get a little more information on her and talk to my buddy here soon and get the scoop on that. But I mean, that thing is just ungodly tall. One more time. This one's tall. This one here is tall. But the next one is just insane, y'all. As I said, they're starting to more or less show themselves, giving us glimpses of the sheer size of these beings. This one here is 15 to 20 feet tall. But the next one, that thing is huge. Seems to be dressed in all black, possibly. But in relation to that mountain, that thing is massive. Never seen anything like it. Look at, she's shaking, or he or she. I would be too. Wow. Truly amazing. Giants exist, y'all. Better get used to the notion, because they're coming out to play. You know me, always bringing you that good stuff. Stay in tune, stay love and light with these things. They are much more advanced than we ever imagined. They are the fallen. And they were here to help us. They were not evil beings. Certain ones are, but certain ones are not. They were here to help us. Y'all, I may have stumbled upon some massive giants on Google Earth, and it's in a very peculiar land that doesn't get talked about very often. Long before Zeus and the Olympians ruled the heavens, the Titans, led by Cronus, held power over the cosmos. But Cronus, fearing a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, devoured each and every one of them at birth. Only one child, Zeus, was saved when his mother, Rhea, tricked Cronus by giving him a swaddled stone instead. Hidden away, Zeus grew strong, and when the time was right, he waged war against the Titans to reclaim the throne of the cosmos. However, Cronus and the Titans were immensely powerful, and despite Zeus rallying his fellow Olympian siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, the war was at a stalemate. The Titans, led by Cronus and the mighty general Atlas, fought fiercely from Mount Osiris, while Zeus and his allies waged battle from Mount Olympus. Realizing that the Olympians needed more strength, Zeus sought to tip the scales in his favor. He journeyed deep into Tartarus, the dark abyss where the Titans had imprisoned some of the most powerful beings in existence, the Cyclops and the Hecatoncres, hundred-handed giants. The Cyclops, Brontes, Steropes, and Argus, were master craftsmen, known for their ability to forge divine weapons. However, they had been imprisoned by Cronus out of fear of their power. Zeus, with his cunning and strength, descended into Tartarus and slew the ancient dragon-like guardian Kempe, whose serpentine form and deadly poison had kept the Cyclops and the Hecatoncres imprisoned for ages. Once freed, the Cyclops swore loyalty to Zeus, grateful for their liberation. In return, they gifted the Olympians with weapons of unmatched power. For Zeus, they forged the thunderbolts, lightning-charged weapons capable of shattering mountains and striking down foes with divine fury. For Poseidon, they created the trident, a weapon that could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness, which granted invisibility and struck terror into the hearts of the enemies. Meanwhile, the Hecatoncres, each possessing 100 arms, joined the battle as well, hurling massive boulders with relentless force. With these powerful new allies, Zeus launched a devastating attack on Mount Osiris. The battle was cataclysmic. The sky burned with Zeus's thunderbolts. Poseidon's trident sent earthquakes rippling through the battlefield, and Hades' helm of darkness allowed him to move unseen, striking terror among the Titans. The Hecatoncres rained down massive stones, overwhelming the enemy lines. One by one, the Titans fell. The once mighty Cronus was defeated by Zeus and bound in unbreakable chains. The Olympians, now victorious, cast the defeated Titans into the depths of Tartarus, ensuring their imprisonment for eternity. Only a few Titans, like Oceanus and Prometheus, who had not fought against Zeus, were spared. The aftermath and the age of the Olympians. With the Titans defeated, Zeus took his place as the ruler of the cosmos. He divided dominion among his brothers. Poseidon took to the seas, Hades took the underworld, and Zeus ruled the heavens from Mount Olympus. As for the Cyclops, they became revered for their craftsmanship, continuing to forge weapons and structures for the gods. Some myths even suggest they later worked in Hephaestus's forge, crafting armor and tools for the divine. Their role in the Titanomachy was instrumental, as without their weapons, Zeus and his siblings might never have triumphed. The Cyclops, though often remembered for their brutish nature in later myths, were among the greatest allies of the gods, their skills shaping the very foundation of Olympus's rule. And thus, the Titan War ended, ushering in the reign of the Olympians. The first one I'm going to take you to is the first one I ever noticed on Google Earth. It absolutely blew my mind, but you can see here, you can see its arm and its leg is sticking out of the snow. The rest of its body is covered with snow. But you can clearly make out the arm to the hand. Then you got the thigh, the knee, and the calf, and the shin. Basically, its entire right leg. And then I measure it. It measures close to 2,100 feet. Absolutely massive being. As you can see as well, I don't know if it's because it's frozen or what, but it seems as though its skin is somewhat intact. I imagine that because it's frozen, but sometimes I wonder if the Titanomachy didn't happen sooner than we think originally. Maybe it wasn't as long ago as we once thought. Obviously, this is mythology for entertainment purposes only, but I believe this is just the start, and he's small. This entire land of Svalbard is a burial ground for after the Titan Olympian War. And I want you to notice on the way down when we're coming to Earth to go to the spot I want to see the giant in, look at the pink hue of the land there. I believe that's because of the blood from the corpses of the giants being stacked up and stacked up. As you can clearly see though, what I have here looks like a griffin, a lion's body, and a eagle or bird head. You can see its ears, its beak, and then its claws on the ground. And even at the end, I go down, pan down, and you can see its tail. Again, another massive being. And it's like a whole cacophony of just different species being dumped here, like as if after the war they cleaned up the lands and this was a dumping ground. Next, we have a massive sea creature of some sort, upwards of 1700 feet. You can see its ribs exposed, it's even decaying, but the thing is huge. Keep watching. It's clearly a bird. You can see its feathers in the shadows. Its wing is decaying, but you can see the outline of its head. Almost looks more like a seagull, maybe. I don't know, but you can see the outline of its head under the snow. Here you can clearly see the nostrils at the end. It's a dragon's head. As you can see, the back half of the dragon is covered up or blurred out, but you can clearly see the head, the nose, the nostrils, and the eyes. From there, I move over to what I clearly see as bird feet gripping something like a corpse. Then I'll pan up and you can clearly see the bird under the snow. But look at the talons. Notice the talons on the fingers. Again, this could all be inserted. Doesn't mean it's absolutely real. Just something I've observed. Don't get too crazy about taking it 100% as fact. I'm just showing you what I've seen and found. And it's just intriguing to me. So I hope you're enjoying. You can clearly see the bird's beak. I'm not sure what it is, possibly a phoenix, and its eyes closed. It's dead, obviously, but this thing is over 4,000 feet tall. Insane. Next on the list, we have the Cyclops. These beings are massive. You can clearly see the singular eye, the lips, the nose, and the head under the snow. The rest of the body must be buried. But yeah, check out what size these heads are. Just the head alone, 4,000 feet. Think about that. It's about 6 heads to your height. So we're talking 20,000 feet or above. Miles tall, y'all. Miles tall. I felt that second one was a little more easily visualized. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. That one really was telling. It reminded me of some character from like The Simpsons or something. Couple more heads under the snow. Well, at least the bodies anyway. But again, notice the red hue to the land. To me, that's absolutely blood. As you can see, I trail over a few more odd-looking items in the area. But there's my secret spot, guys. See what you can find. Go check it out. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are they real? Are they implanted? Are they fake? I'm just curious as to what your all opinions are. Could it have been a result of the Titanomachy that they had dumped the corpses from the war there and they just stacked them until they are what they are today? Is all landscape, was it once a living thing? Was it once an organic living thing? Was all the landscape at one time alive? Do you believe that? Especially if you consider the Noskin map. Very intriguing, for sure. As you can see, you can kind of point out more features of different types of animals and beings as I pan around the area. Then you can see what I think is actual flesh sticking out of the snow that has been preserved for thousands of years, possibly because it's frozen. Let me know what you guys think. The Romanian stone giant, a sleeping colossus hidden deep in the mountains of Argeș County, Romania. There's a formation locals have whispered about for generations. They call it the stone giant. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a natural cliff. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. A massive stone arm carved into the mountain, a ribcage-like shelf stretching unnaturally straight, and behind it, a wall of rock that some say resembles the torso of a sleeping colossus. According to Romanian legend, the ancient land was once ruled by a race of Urasi, giants who lived long before recorded history. And many believe this cliff is not just shaped like a giant, but is the fossilized remains of one. Workers who visit the site claim the stone giant is part of a triangular power grid of ancient power points, connecting Corbit de Piatra with the rock sanctuaries of Namaeste and Cetățuia. They say the giant still sleeps inside the stone, that the formation radiates an energy unlike anything else in Romania. Whether it's a natural oddity, a forgotten monument, or the weathered body of something massive left behind by a civilization we've lost, one thing's for sure, the stone giant of Romania is one of the strangest formations in Europe, and it's hiding its secrets in plain sight. What do you think? Ancient giant or just a mountain? But there is a deeper story of the Romanian stone giant. It's the legend of the sleeping Uriaș. Long before Romania was Romania, long before the Romans or the Dacians, the land was said to be home to a race called the Uriași, colossal beings who shaped mountains like clay and carved entire sanctuaries with their bare hands. One legend said the stone giant at Corbi de Piatra was a protector of the Carpathian people, the giant who refused to kneel. His name was Faramaturul, the Crusher. He stood guard over the entrance to a massive underground realm beneath the Carpathian Mountains. That realm, according to village folklore, was a network of tunnels stretching across ancient Europe. When foreign invaders came, described as men of the sun with iron faces, possibly Romans, the giant refused to kneel or swear allegiance. Rather than be captured, the giant called on the spirit of the mountain for protection, and the mountain answered. The earth opened up beneath him. Stone climbed up his body like armor, and he sank into the cliffside, becoming one with the rock. The overhanging arm you see? Locals say that's the last piece of him still exposed, the arm he raised in defiance. Then there's the curse of the sleeping ones. Another legend says the stone giant is only sleeping. The Uriași weren't killed. They were put into a stasis, hidden, buried, turned to stone, until the world needed them again. This belief is still alive today among mystics who visit the site. Many claim the rock formation breathes or pulses at dawn. The energy there is heavier on the right side, where the giant's heart would be. People who meditate beneath the ledge feel a thundering vibration. They say the giant is part of a triangular energy grid known as the Initiatic Triangle. And that system represents the body of the giant, the physical realm, the guardian, the protector. The Pelasgian connection. Some claim the cliffs were carved by the Pelasgians, an ancient pre-Dacian civilization said to be taller than normal humans. Master stoneworkers connected to the giants of Europe. Descendants of the Atlantean refugees. Romanian traditions even say the Pelasgians did not build monuments, they revealed them by carving away the excess stone, meaning the giant shape wasn't built. It was uncovered. But there is a modern mystery in recent years. Romanian researchers and explorers have documented unnatural straight cuts in the rock, a perfectly level, horizontal ledge that looks engineered, a gate-like carved niche that leads nowhere, unusual magnetic readings around the cliff face. Many believe the entire area wasn't just a sanctuary, but a megalithic fossil of something ancient. Some say it's a giant's petrified body. Others say it's the entrance to an underground complex that has been sealed for millennia. Either way, the site is unlike anything else in Europe. To this day, it drives thousands of tourists a year and leaves the onlookers baffled, wondering what could be the truth behind such an ancient monument. The Solomon Island Mysteries by Marius Borean, and it brings to light some of the legend and lore that may actually be true from the Guadalcanal, its tribes in the Solomon Islands, namely the tribe's interaction with giants. There's even a little UFO folklore mixed in there, but the story I'm going to tell is the 5 killer giants and the legend of how a misfit tribal member, if you will, saves the day. Very awesome story. Then we're going to lead into more stuff pertaining to cryptids and the like. I came across this gentleman's TikTok. Very interesting. Very low view counts. It's really a pretty low key TikTok page overall. Some of the stuff he talks about that he got from a follower who sent him the information about a gentleman they call Old Man Eric. And I think it might be Eric Muehlberg, an explorer from the early 1900s who wrote a couple books about the Australian outback. He's actually known for stealing Aboriginal corpses to bring them back to Sweden, and he puts them in a museum. They have later gave them back, but this haunted him for years, and it kind of put a stain on his legacy. But he did some amazing exploration in Australia and Southeast Asia area, and some of the accounts that this gentleman told this follower who knew him at his older age, even knew him where this gentleman was shown slides by Eric Muehlberg of creatures that he encountered while on these expeditions. And y'all, some of the stuff he talks about, just wait and see. So the following stories are by a gentleman named Marcus Borean. He was 35, living in Australia, when suddenly he found himself bored and looking for adventure. It sounds like he came from money, so he up and decided to move to the Solomon Islands. It was a promise that him and his mom had made to each other, I think before she passed away, that they would go back. I think they originated from there. They would go back and see their homelands. He never got to with his mom, so he did it in her name. And he ended up falling in love with the lands and their rich culture and heritage. And in that process, he gets introduced to phenomena that he never knew existed. Essentially, things like UFOs coming from mountains, diving down in the oceans. That's going to be another chapter that I would like to kind of present to you guys sooner or later, because it's very, very fascinating. The locals called it the White Dragon, but Mr. Borean quickly realized as he saw it that it was in fact a UFO, and that UFO had been diving into the water at the exact same site that 2 World War II submarines were sank by the Japanese that were, I think they were Australian submarines, or at least one Australian and one United States submarine, maybe. But this UFO kept diving into the water, doing whatever it did with the submarines, and then it would exit. And it was almost on a daily basis. Now, that is what he first encounters. Eventually, he encounters and sees giants, the Guadalcanal giants to be exact. And in doing so, he integrates with the local tribes, the Tanqueray. They tell him some amazing stories about tales of their battles with the giants battles amongst themselves, and many more amazing stories that are alleged and he claims are true. This is the story of the 5 killer giants in the Guadalcanal, and hope you enjoy. The southern side of the Guadalcanal is appropriately named the Weather Coast because of the huge waves that constantly batter it from the Solomon and Coral Seas. These days, it is sparsely populated due to its remoteness and the influence of the white man. But that was not always the case in centuries past. Prior to the 20th century, the Weather Coast had villages scattered all along the 150-kilometer southern coastline. The largest of these villages was Tangarare, which is located on the southwest side of the Weather Coast beach. Each village had a chief who was subservient to the control of the all-powerful paramount chief, who lived in the center of Tangarare. These people were fierce headhunting cannibals allied with the nearby Russell Islanders, who continuously sent their headhunting parties to wage war against the other Solomon Islands. It was during this time that the giants of the Guadalcanal still had a heavy surface population within the interior of the Guadalcanal region. From time to time, these Weather Coast people would have encounters with these giants. This is the true story of one of those occasions. Reports of a group of bandit killer giants that had been slaughtering and eating people from the East Weather Coast were reaching the paramount chief. It had not been unusual to hear of a rogue killer giant here and there, but 5 of them, banded together, posed a real concern. Initially, the attacks over the 100-kilometer coastline were isolated incidences in the villages of the east. But as the months went by, the murderous killings of these vicious giants began to occur more frequently towards the villages of the west. This pack of giants was stalking coastal villages day or night, brazenly raiding them and grabbing whoever they could. They would even sometimes start consuming the victims alive while everyone else ran in absolute terror. Believing these 5 monstrous giants to be from one family, they became known by all of Tangarare as the 5 Killer Giant Brothers. Many people had lost their lives and had been made a meal of this pack of cannibal giants. Numerous village chiefs had sent their warrior hunting parties after them, only to return in vain with fewer warriors. Fear reigned amongst the villages of the coastline, for it seemed that nowhere and no one was safe from the slaughtering, killing ways of the 5 giant brothers. The paramount chief had become frustrated with all of his chiefs' futile attempts at subduing the restless murdering spree of these giants. So he ordered for the drums to call all the village chiefs of the Weather Coast to come to Tangarare for a big meeting. The paramount chief had devised a plan to put a little more incentive into all of his people's efforts in defeating the beasts. He had decided to place a bounty on the 5 heads of the giants for any man that could bring them to him. Within Guadalcanal custom law, the eldest-born daughter inherits the land rights held by her mother and father in the event of their death. Upon marriage, her husband has the control of the land, but virtually no ownership rights, which their firstborn daughter inherits again. This complicated method of inheritance is still practiced to this day. The eldest-born daughter of the paramount chief's many wives was a beautiful young woman named Gina. Warriors had approached the paramount chief on many occasions for her hand in marriage, but he had not given his consent to them. It was his intention to tell the chiefs at the meeting that the reward for the warrior who could kill and bring the heads of the giants would get his beautiful daughter Gina's hand in marriage and half of his pigs. The momentous day arrived when the chiefs had assembled together at the Tangarare War House. Tangarare was bustling with the activity of visitors from all the other coastal villages who inquisitively had come to see the purpose of the paramount chief's big meeting. With his chiefs before him, they began to discuss the problem that they all had with the 5 killer giants. The village chiefs told him that despite sending numerous warrior hunting parties, setting traps, and poisonous baits, many of their warriors had been killed and the giants still eluded them while continuing to kill their people. The paramount chief sat quietly listening to all their explanations of why they could not slay the giants. He became displeased with what he had heard and proceeded to tell his chiefs that he was tired of hearing their feeble excuses and fearful lack of enthusiasm for combating the 5 giants. He spoke of all the battles they had victoriously won against the other islands, and here they had a mere 5 giants which they could not destroy. Then he told them that to any man who could bring him the 5 heads of the giants, he would give his daughter's hand in marriage and half of the pigs he owned. This was a very significant gift to the indigenous people of the Guadalcanal, as it also meant a big land inheritance was passed down through the eldest daughter's hand in marriage. With that, the paramount chief welcomed them all to stay for the feast and sing-sing that was to be held that night. News of what had happened at the chief's meeting quickly spread around Tangarare. Already that day, the people started placing odds on their favorite warriors, whom they thought would be likely to kill the giants. Many of the more popular warriors had proven themselves by acquiring scores of skulls. But living at Tangarare also was a young man by the name of Yule, who was considered by all to be the village idiot. Although he was from a great warrior family, it seemed there was nothing this young man could do that was anything short of stupidity. Since Yule was not considered to be anywhere near the caliber of a warrior, he was consequently subjected to performing the more menial task of tendering gardens and collecting firewood. That evening, many pigs were sacrificed to their ancestral gods and eaten, after which the Sing Sing proceeded. The paramount chief, with his beautiful daughter at his side, proudly sat in line with all the other chiefs watching the festivities, and all the warriors gazed at their bounty sitting before them. Yule had always secretly desired Gina too, however. He'd known that, because of his poor social standing, it was impossible for him to marry her. But now that the paramount chief had promised his daughter's hand in marriage in return for the 5 heads of the giants, Yule knew that at least he might actually stand a chance. During one of the dances of the Sing Sing, in which Yule was participating, he danced his way over to the paramount chief and boldly told him that he would kill the giants for him. The paramount chief, while sitting on his throne-like chair, took his staff and hit Yule over the head with it, telling him to get lost and not to bother him. Yule was embarrassed by his public scolding and left the Sing Sing while people jeered profanities at him. The next day, all the chiefs and their parties left to go back to their villages to tell their people of the meeting's outcome. The air was filled with excitement at Tangarare. As warriors prepared themselves for the hunt for the giants, numerous warriors, who wanted his blessing before they embarked on their pursuit, surrounded the paramount chief. One by one, the warriors departed deep into the jungle on their hopeful conquest. Meanwhile, Yule watched everything going on as he carried on with his menial village chores. Weeks went by, and only a few warriors had managed to return, with tales of them barely escaping with their lives. Similar reports from other villages had reached the paramount chief, with further news of more killings and attacks by the giants. Many of their best warriors had lost their lives. All hope of killing the giants was fading, and the people of Tangarare had become despondent. Yule, with his foolish and cheerful manner, would sometimes joke with the people that he knew of a way to kill the giants, but they would only rebuke and belittle him, as they did not take his comments seriously. So one day, after being heckled yet again, he made up his mind to prove them wrong. Yule went to the paramount chief with his hunting gear in hand and told him that he was on his way to kill the giants and that upon his return he should prepare the wedding feast for the marriage of his daughter. The paramount chief laughed his head off, thinking this was the most ridiculous thing he had ever heard. How could Yule possibly defeat the giants, when all of his greatest warriors had tried and failed to do so? He thought to himself. He sarcastically told the young man to go and kill the giants then, chastising him as he departed. Yule's mother begged him not to go, but he had made up his mind and left the village for the jungle. On the Guadalcanal, there is a rare species of plant that has an anesthesia-like effect if consumed by a person. The juices from the crushed roots are mixed into a solution with finely crushed particles of coral lime and then dried into a powder. The fine powder is then gently blown from the palm of the hand into the air, which takes it to the unsuspecting recipient or recipients. As the case may be, the manufacturers of these crafty powders often perform spiritual rituals whilst making them. Their method of manufacture was known to their ancestors and was and still passed on from generation to generation. Yule's plan was to use this powder to subdue the 5 giants so that he could slaughter them at will. He cautiously made his way into the depth of the tropical rainforest, where he made his camp and set about looking for the anesthetic plant. After finding several suitable plant specimens, he removed their roots and took them back with him to the safety of his camp. Over a period of a few days, he made a strong concoction of the anesthetic powder that would knock the socks off an elephant, or as he thought, at least 5 giants. Armed with this new weapon, he made his way to the area where the giants were last seen. Yule believed the giants had an exceptional sense of smell. He traveled deep into the mountainous interior in order to be in the lead of the giants with the sea breeze, therefore avoiding detection. Several days went by as Yule perched himself high in a variety of different trees around the area, while waiting for the giants to come past. As he was moving along to another area, he came across the entrance of a cave that was littered with human bones and remains. He also saw evidence of the giants' large footprints. Yule soon realized that that was one of the giants' lairs, and so he found himself a safe, high position in a nearby tree and waited for their return. Meanwhile, the people of Tangararea had given up on him for dead. In the afternoon, as Yule was snoozing on top of his tree perch, he was awoken by the nearby noise of grunting and snorting, which was coming from the 5 giants who were sitting at the entrance of the cave devouring a human kill. It was true what the people had said. They were huge and ugly. Safe and out of sight high up in his tree, Yule knew that the giants would have to eventually go to sleep. And he was right, for not long after eating their fill, the giants went into their cave to lie down. After waiting an hour or so to make sure the giants were fully asleep, Yule quietly climbed down the tree and stealthily crept through the thick forest undergrowth towards the edge of the clearing in front of the cave. His heart was pounding with anxiety and fear. While removing his bamboo container of the anesthetic powder from his carry basket, he listened for any sign of movement. All he could hear was snoring. Emptying a large portion of the powder into the palm of his hand, he slowly crept to the edge of the cave's entrance. Conscious of the wind direction, he slowly began to blow the potent powder from his palm into the entrance of the cave. The light, gentle breeze carried the ominous concoction into the cave where the giants were sleeping. Not satisfied with the large portion of powder that had already gone into the cave, Yule then blew in some more, for good measure, and hastily tiptoed to the cover of the nearby forest undergrowth. Yule knew that the powder had an instantaneous effect on any human being, but as for giants, he was not so sure. As he waited for the powder to take effect, and to allow the residue powder to dissipate, he noticed that he could no longer hear the giants snoring. Cautiously, he tiptoed his way back to the cave's entrance. Waiting a moment, he quickly peered around the corner and saw the giants were totally comatose. And with his primitive stone axe in one hand and a little more powder in the other, he carefully entered the cave to further inspect the condition of the 5 giants. Prodding them for any sign of movement, he found that they were completely under the effect of the anesthetic powder. Discarding the rest from his hand outside the cave, he returned to the helpless giants to take his revenge on behalf of his people. Yule struck each of the giants in the neck with several mighty blows from his sharp stone axe, and allowed them to bleed to death. After the 5 giants had died, he took their heads and threw them outside the cave's entrance. While looking at the 5 heads of the giants, Yule paused for a moment to reflect on the significance of what he had just done. Cutting down a suitable sapling to carry them, Yule tied them onto the pole by their long hair and started his arduous journey back to Tangarare. The people of Tangarare had long forgotten the village idiot Yule. The chiefs from the other villages had arrived again to participate in a custom magic ritual to call their ancestral spirit gods for help in vanquishing the 5 giants. With all the people crowded around as the ceremony was proceeding, Yule appeared from out of the forest, carrying the 5 heads of the giants slung on his pole. But nobody noticed him at first as he carried the heads towards the gathering. But as he reached the perimeter of the enormous crowd, they parted in astonishment, allowing him to make his way through to the paramount chief. The crowd broke into an uproar and halted the ceremony as Yule proudly carried the heads towards their leader. Yule placed the 5 heads of the giant on the ground in front of the paramount chief, who had already risen from his chair. The people fell silent. With a short pause, Yule said, "I have killed the 5 giant brothers, as I said I would, and now I have come for my reward, which you promised." All the chiefs gathered around the giants' heads to inspect their authenticity. The village custom, magic taboo man, in other words, the witch doctor, who was leading the ceremony, turned to the crowd and told them all that this was the gift from their ancestral spirit gods. With that, all the people began to cheer Yule for his victory over the giants. They mobbed him while carrying him above their heads. In a short turnaround of events, Yule had become their hero and a warrior. Although reluctant, the paramount chief was obliged to honor his promised bounty for the 5 heads of the giants to Yule. He announced to his people the upcoming marriage of Yule and Gina, and that half of his pigs now belonged to Yule, as he saved all his people from the Weather Coast from the killing spree of the 5 killer giant brothers. Yule and Gina were married and had many children, some of whose descendants I have personally met. As far as their history goes, Yule never made it to the position of chief, but he was always remembered as the warrior who killed the 5 killer giant brothers. The reason why I've recorded some of these more prominent giant encounters is that apart from the fact that they actually occurred, they portray the absolute horrifying history that the Solomon Islanders have endured whilst having to cohabitate
for millennia with these voracious giants. I cannot think of anywhere in all recorded history where people have had to undergo for thousands of years something that's akin to a horror movie. If this kind of barbaric Homo sapien giant relationship has existed in the Solomon Islands for what they say is thousands of years, then it must have been happening elsewhere in the modern world. Man just doesn't know about it.
This is the legend of the Giants' War of the Solomon Islands, Part 1. It's said that giants have inhabited the Solomon Islands for thousands of years, dating back as far as possibly the fallen from the Book of Enoch. Many of the local indigenous believe that these giants even survived the Great Flood, and they inhabit the subterranean pockets, possibly to this day. For example, a well-known story takes place in 1998, when Ross Mining Company was able to allegedly bribe government employees to allow them to attempt to mine gold on the islands. According to witnesses, a mine was set to be dug at a location known as Gold Ridge on one of the islands. So the company immediately began moving in heavy equipment, namely bulldozers, because they had to prepare to move massive amounts of dirt in search for the gold. It's said shortly after they began excavations, a blade pin on one of the dozers broke, putting it out of commission. So rather than having to deal with taking the 10-ton blade back to the shop, they just dropped it in its place and took the dozer back instead. But what Ross Mining Company apparently didn't know was that the zone that they were mining actually butted up to lands inhabited by the giants. So after having fixed the pin on the bulldozer, they brought it back to the job site the next day. But much to their astonishment, the 10-ton blade was gone and they had no idea where it went. They were absolutely baffled, considering that the thing weighed 10 tons. What could have possibly moved it? So the crew began looking. They began combing the area to see if they could possibly find this massive blade. When one of the workers was combing the edge of the thick jungle, and he yells out, "Hey guys, I found it!" What they weren't ready for was what they found next to the blade. A massive footprint, claimed to be up to 3 feet in length. While the workers never fully came to a conclusion, the indigenous people or the locals knew exactly what it was. They claimed that this giant, with a massive footprint up to 3 feet in length, making it close to 18 feet tall, tossed the blade over 100 feet into the foliage. This account is just one of many, and what others don't know is the indigenous people of the Solomon Islands have been dealing with these giants for thousands of years. And what these people have gone through while living beside these massive humanoids will absolutely blow your mind. So stay tuned. Part 2. The Giants of the Solomon Islands, Part 2. Killer Giant. Chief Hyamis of the Northwest Guadalcanal tribe, the Maravavos, sits on the beach defeated. Behind him, one of the many small villages of the tribe lay in waste, reduced to debris the night before. Tears begin rolling down the chief's face due to the death of his eldest son, his most favored child. He can't believe it has come to this, but he knows he must do what he has to do to save the tribe's people. The night prior, they were having a village-wide ceremony when suddenly they hear boom, boom, boom. The ground around them begins to shake, and they know exactly what this means. It sounds as though a herd of elephants is crashing through the dense forest, and it gets closer and closer until suddenly it bursts out of the edge of the jungle. The villagers scream in sheer terror and begin scrambling for their lives as the 20-foot-tall giant gazes upon them. He smiles at the thought of what's to come before he lets out a loud, Hulk-like roar. The striations in his muscles flex, and he resembles something of a Titan or a Herculean hero. But he is far from it. He starts through the village, grabbing up victims one by one. As this is going on, a handful of warriors arm themselves with spears and begin an attempt to push him back, with little effect, because he is just too massive. The giant, who was more annoyed than deterred, sets his eye on the lead warrior, who was the chief's son. He snatches him up and slams him to the ground, killing him instantly. He then, with his dinner in one hand and the other hand free, defeats the rest of the soldiers with ease. When done with the warriors, he continues his attack until he gotten his fill. Satisfied, the beast retreats into the jungle. After this attack, the chief was at his wit's end. He didn't know what to do. He'd been fighting this beast for months, and they cannot seem to defeat him. Countless warriors, Countless villagers sacrificed. They tried their hardest to hold their ground, but they couldn't. They simply had to go. So he orders the drums to be beat to the sound that tells the villagers there's a village meeting. Known as a great warrior among the tribes himself, Chief Hyamis is almost ashamed of his decision, running away from a singular giant they cannot defeat. But as a leader, he knew that he must if he wanted to save his people's lives. Chapuru, the chief's eldest daughter, was being punished for having a child out of wedlock. While restricted to just her hut, she sat and listened to the meeting. Terror struck as she knew she might be left behind. The story of the Solomon Island Giants, Part 3. They abandoned their village. During the meeting, the chief told the village people to gather as much as they possibly could, get their war canoes, and were leaving today. Once the meeting was over, Chapuru anxiously waited for her family to get back to the hut. They confirmed her fears. They began packing their things and loading them onto their war canoe. As they were doing this, Chapuru cordially approached her mother and asked whether or not she'd be able to go with them when they left. Her reply was, "I don't know. You'll have to ask your father. It's up to him." The rest of the tribe, along with their canoes, had already departed. The chief's was the very last one. Chapuru's siblings were loading the final items and getting ready to shove off when she ran down the beach and approached her father. She respectfully asked him, "Father, am I to come also?" with a look of absolute fear in her eyes. Her father's reply, "No, you cannot come. There is no room for you, and you have broken our laws, so you must stay. The giant can have you. Let that be your punishment." And with that, her family shoved off, and she watched as the canoe disappeared around the corner. She broke down and cried in despair. Her tribe and her family abandoned her. She's in utter disbelief. But as darkness falls, she remembers that the giant will return to look for more victims. And just as she was deciding what to do, she heard it. Boom, boom, boom. The massive beast blasts out of the edge of the jungle and looks for the villagers, but much to his surprise, they are all gone. Knowing that there's no point in running because the giant's speed and agility far surpassed that of a human's, Chapuru laid down and played dead, waiting for the giant to take her. Through squinting eyes, she watched as the giant spotted her and began to approach. She held her breath, hoping to God he didn't figure out she was alive. Once he got to her, he kneeled down and began smelling her, looking for rotten flesh. And there was something he obviously did not like, because he went back to the jungle and started looking for bamboo so he could sharpen it and cut away the spoiled meat. When the beast was out of sight, she got up and began running as fast as she could. She ran like she has never ran before, to put as much distance between her and the giant as physically possible. Under the cover of darkness, she made her way towards southwest Guadalcanal. It said she ran for 2 days and 2 nights in fear that the monster was tracking her, which apparently they're really good at. Eventually finding shelter and passing out. After this series, I'll share the source I used for these stories. For next, Solomon Island Giants, Part 4, The Twins' Revenge. When she woke up the next morning, Chapuru felt she put enough distance between her and the giant, so she began looking for some sort of shelter. She walked for a few more miles south, but knew she was getting close to the other tribes, but didn't want to run into them in fear of them putting her to death because of her unwedded condition being with child. Eventually, she'd find a cave behind a small waterfall. She often seen passing canoes go by, but hid from them in fear of her condition. So she went on basically living in the jungle by herself, taking care of herself. She made vegetable gardens, fished, hunted to satisfy her ever-increasing appetite. Months later, she would birth 2 boys, twins. So with virtually no help, this girl lived on her own, birthed herself, took care of her twins with 0 family support or tribe support. For the next few years, she raised her boys, taught them how to hunt, fish, and eventually they grew up and were able to help her take care of each other. So years later, the twins were now in adolescence, and she had been sharing the stories of her heritage, sadly, with them. As they grew into their teenage years, Masi and Konda saw the sadness on their mother's face. They saw the sorrow that filled her heart as she shared the stories of her tribe's people, the Maravavo. And of course, with sharing those stories, she also had to tell them about the giant. So one night, after Chapuru had been weeping, telling her sons the stories, the twins, who were ever rebellious, devised up a plan to redeem their mother's name. They decided they'd go back to northwest Guadalcanal, where her old tribe was, seek out the giant that had caused all of this mayhem, and avenge their mother. So after agreeing on their plan, Masi and Konda went to sleep. The next morning, when they woke up, they told their mother they were going on an adventure and they'd be back by dinner. But they never came back. That evening, the twins weren't home for dinner. And they had never done this before. They had never stayed out past dark. So Chapuru waited anxiously for as long as she could stand. And she knew exactly what they were doing. She grabbed her spear and headed towards her old village. She moved hastily up the coast all night, hoping she could intercept them and stop them from this foolish task. 2 days later, Masi and Konda ended up at Condo Vele, their old village. Then, with somewhat naive faith in themselves and their bows, they set out on the hunt. So Masi and Konda make their way towards the mountains in the tropical rainforest that the giant was said to inhabit. Meanwhile, Chapuru was making her way as fast as she could to catch up with her defiant sons. After stealthily moving through the thick jungles for hours, Masi and Konda stumbled upon a giant's footprint. This led them to believe the giants were still in the area, so they continued on towards the mountain, when they found freshly made footprints. At this point, they knew they were in close proximity of their target. Concerned for the wind direction, they continued to follow the tracks left by the giant until they got into a clearing at the base of a foothill. They quietly crept into the clearing when suddenly the giant jumped out of the bushes. Startled, they ducked down really quick, but it was too late. The giant had spotted them. Standing about 30 meters away from them, the giant, with his large stone axe raised in the air, let out a violent, blood-curdling roar and then tossed the axe at the twins. Seeing the axe hurtling towards them, the twins separated, and the axe went right between them, hitting a tree behind them and toppling it over instantly. As they split, Masi and Konda swiftly reached for their bows and pulled them out, smooth and easy, calm and collected. To them, it seemed like time had slowed down, but in reality, they were very quick with their movements. They knocked an arrow, drew back, and shot at the giant, both of their arrows piercing it in the chest. It stopped in its track. The giant pulled the arrows out. Now he was angry. He raged and started heading towards them once again, when Masi pulled another arrow out, shot it, and hit the giant directly in the eye. When Konda saw this, he got a little jealous, so he knocked up an arrow real quick and hit the giant in the other eye, rendering it blind. The beast cried out in pain, while the brothers, eagerly jostling with each other, began shooting one arrow after another at the heart of the beast. The giant stood motionless for a few seconds and then fell over with a loud thud. He was dead, and they cautiously approached, firing a few more arrows for good measure. When they realized he was dead, they shouted for joy. The twins never had any doubt in their mind they were going to successfully kill this giant that had caused so much pain for their mother and her tribe. So as evidence, they cut off the giant's head and went back to the old village where their mother was waiting for them. As they approached their mother, they raised the head of the giant. "Mother, look, look!" With this, she boiled over. Chapuru, enraged at her disobedient sons, goes over to a tree, breaks off a switch, and begins whipping them, cursing them for being so defiant. The boys the entire time were trying to plead their case as they had killed the beast, but their mother didn't care. She was angry. But once her anger subsided, she couldn't believe what they accomplished. She was so excited they finally killed the beast that caused her so much turmoil. So the old Maravavo tribe with Chief Hymus actually moved to another island across the way. They could still actually see their old village. So the boys climbed up with the giant's head to the top of a coconut tree and lit it ablaze. As they were eating breakfast the next morning, getting ready to head back home, they saw a canoe come around the corner with 40 or so warriors on board. Their grandfather, the chief, saw the smoke and sent warriors to investigate. They found Chapuru and the twins with the giant having been killed. Startled, the twins grabbed their weapons and get ready to go to war. This was the first time they had ever seen another human. Chapuru, quickly recognizing that they were her fellow tribesmen, told the twins to wait and greeted them as they made it to shore, explaining what had took place. They were actually very joyous to see Chapuru alive, as they had kind of forgotten about her, assuming the giant had had his way with her. She told the story of her warrior sons as they approached, arrows ready, still weary of the tribesmen. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. They quickly went back to the island where the chief was and told them the story. Deeply saddened by the way he treated Chapuru, he called the village elders to a meeting. Chapuru eagerly waited at the old village for her people, and they came back, rejoiced, embracing her with open arms. Her father was the first to step off the canoe, and with tears of joy, they hugged. That night, they held festivities, pigs were slaughtered, and they sacrificed for the ancestral gods. Masi and Konda were given wives and large parcels of land. They later fought off a western headhunting tribe successfully, and they went down in history as some of the greatest warriors of their tribe. Chapuru never remarried, the chief had passed away, and made Masi the new chief. Chapuru passed away in the late 19th century. They buried her at a village that is now named after her. Masi and Konda lived till a ripe old age, and they are now buried in their old village. And if you go to the islands and ask any local, they will know this story. It still rings throughout history. And that's just one of the many stories of the Solomon Island Giants. I will continue. Hope you enjoyed. All right, y'all. So this is the book that I found these stories in. Very unique, very interesting. So Marius Borean wrote the book, and they were his first-hand accounts of his experiences on the Solomon Islands. Now, Gareth Owen published it. Gareth Owen worked for some magazine company, and he kept coming across Marius's stories, and at first wrote them off as outlandish and far-fetched, but for some reason they kept calling him. So eventually he contacted Marius, and he did go to the Solomon Islands himself. They were going to go to all these sacred grounds that the giants supposedly were from, and hopefully maybe film them or something like that. This was like mid-90s. So they didn't even make it quite a year because one of their colleagues unfortunately caught a rare, or I don't know about caught, but just got diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. So unfortunately this cut the trip short, and they all had to leave, and they were never able to go back. But they were able to hear a lot of amazing stories from the tribes and Marius himself. So Marius, at the age of 35, saw no future for himself in Australia. He was kind of down in the dumps, lost a couple loves, and just didn't really feel that he had a purpose. So he grabbed his atlas and opened it, and it had circled, and with an arrow at it, 1,000 islands here. His mother had written it when he was younger. So he instantly knew the Solomon Islands is where he was going. So he packed up his things, had enough money at the time, headed out. Little did he know this would take him on an adventure that he absolutely was not expecting. He hires a regular taxi driver named Big John, who is tied into the tribes. He was a local. He introduced him, and which is rare for a white man. And eventually he would meet his wife and get more entrenched into the tribal world. As I said, this is rare for a white man, but he's a good guy. They took a liking to him quick, and they began sharing their legends and lore with him. And he was absolutely mind blown. So this book he tried to get out to the world, but really didn't get much traction. Needless to say, he saw a lot of resistance, but that was a different time. I feel today there couldn't be a better time to share this with the world. But you know the deal, for entertainment purposes only. This is the Book of Enoch, and the first story, the Book of the Watchers. For those of you that aren't familiar, the Book of Enoch was part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in 1946 and 47. It's an ancient Hebrew religious text that follows the story of Enoch, Noah's great-grandfather. The account was written in 200 to 300 BC. but the stories are said to have taken place before the Great Flood. In the first book, Enoch tells the story of the Watchers. Now, what exactly are the Watchers? As the name would suggest, the Watchers were tasked by the Lord to watch over earth and humanity. They could literally see and hear everything. They were considered the messengers or the middle ground between earth and heaven. Enoch would describe them as angels, but they weren't necessarily angels in good standing with God. There were over 200 assigned watchers, and they watched over the children of men for years. They would observe as men multiplied and became obsessed with the beauty of their daughters. Eventually, they would grow tired of this arrogance, and they would decide to descend upon earth and take mortal wives to bear their children. After the 200 watchers would observe mankind, boasting about the beauty of their daughters for years, they would descend upon earth and use them to bear their children. The leader of the watchers feared not all would agree with his idea, and that the punishment for such a great sin would all fall upon him. So he gathered all 10 chiefs of the watchers, and they made an oath not to abandon this plan. This oath would also bound them to one another, meaning if one got punished, they all did. So the watchers would leave their post, descend upon earth, and take mortal wives. The chief watchers, mainly Azazel, would share secrets forbidden to mankind. He would teach them how to make breastplates, sword, and shield, and would show them about the known metals of earth. They would teach them of jewelry and beautifying of the eyelids, and costly stone coloring tinctures, namely makeup. From there arose much godlessness. Eventually, this would lead to the Nephilim. These were giants born of watchers and mortal women, and it wasn't long before they would lose control of them. So the watchers take mortal wives and have children. These are the Nephilim. The Nephilim are giants, and they're said they could be up to 1,000 feet tall. At first, the giants and humans were able to coexist. But eventually, the giants would turn, and they'd start pillaging and murdering humans. Between this and Watcher Azazel showing them of armor and sword, which would lead to war and battles among men. After for years watching this take place, archangels went to the Lord. And of course, the Lord would already have a plan. Each of them would get a specific task, and this would all lead to the end of days. Destroying everything was the only way to guarantee the Nephilim wouldn't survive. Then man could retake Earth without hindrance. Archangel Uriel would be tasked with informing Noah, letting him know that he would be the one to repopulate Earth. Raphael was to eliminate Azazel. Since he did the vast majority of teaching the humans sin, Raphael was to open up a hole in the desert and cast him there. After the Watchers create sin among men and they create the Nephilim, God has had enough and he informs the archangels of his plan for the end of days. As this was the only way the Nephilim wouldn't survive, come back and reproduce, hindering man from existence. So each archangel gets sent down with a specific task preceding the end of days. Uriel gets sent down to tell Noah of what's to come and to prepare because he's going to repopulate the earth someday. Raphael gets tasked with taking out Azazel, the main teacher of sin. He is to open up a hole in the desert and cast him into the depth, pinning him there till Judgment Day. Gabriel is sent to kill children of men born of sin and the giants, and he would do this by inciting a war between the two. Michael got to take out the leader of the Watchers, Samiaza. He was also to be cast into a fiery dungeon until Judgment Day. He was also to take out any of the Watchers who indulged in mortal flesh. Where Enoch comes into play in all this, he's the middleman. He's the messenger between them and God. When he tells the Watchers of God's plan, they panic. They asked Enoch to help them and sign a petition. Later that night, Enoch had a dream and God said no. The end of days ensued. They took unto themselves wives and chose one for each himself. And they three became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. Now, if you don't know what L means, elbow to hand. That's a unit of measure they used back then. In certain societies, the length an L represented differed, ranging from what is commonly known as 18 inches. But as I looked it up, the average from the French to the Scottish was well over 2 feet. The Scottish, 54 inches was an L. So I've been looking into Norse and Greek mythology, and they talk about Zeus, the son of Cronus. Cronus was a titan, and he ate all of his children in fear that they would overthrow his throne. Cronus' wife, Rhea, grew angry over this, so she decided to take one of his sons and hide him. His name was Zeus, and he was hid and raised on Crete Island. So a while back, I remember doing a video on Crete Island and how there was a lot of giants' remains found there. The remains found ranged anywhere from 40 feet up to 72 feet in length. And I also read that there was a lot of giant activity around Sardinia, so I began looking on Google Earth to check it out. Crete Island, Sardinia. And here's what I found on the ocean floor next to Sardinia. All of these, what look like footsteps. I'm saying if you took a regular person and told them to take steps and multiple steps on the beach in clay or sand and then mimic them, these will line up pretty close to the same steps and foot patterns as what a human would lay. So I humored the idea and thought, well, maybe it was a giant. And here's what I found. Upon zooming in and using the measurement tool on Google Earth, one of those footsteps was 4,625 feet. There's more. And these footprints appeared all over, up the coast of Africa, all through the Mediterranean. You could find these footprints. And what's more amazing, I found some that strided out. Stride 10.4 miles. So I guess what I'm saying is, could these footprints have been left by a Titan? Possibly even Cronus. And my boy Mini Minuteman, who criticized me about finding footprints on the ocean floor 2.1 miles deep, no, he didn't need a snorkel. He was over 2 miles tall. And his feet print, much larger than 7 feet. The stories of the Titans, I believe, is true, and they were massive beyond belief. Poseidon, said to be a giant god of the sea. Could they be his feet print? God of the sea, he could travel through all the oceans without even having to go underwater. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but it did say in the book of Enoch, 3,000 ells. When doing the math, that ranged from the smallest 4,500 feet to up to 12,500 feet. So before I continue, smash that like button, hit the bell, and subscribe to my page for more content like this. I know some of the stuff I post can seem far-fetched, but rather than disregard these people that are telling these stories in ancient times as total quacks, why not take them seriously? Why not legitimize them? This is how they knew how to relay what they experienced. Today, if there was a flood, everything would be gone. Everything. Record of everything we have. But what would be left? Certain people that lived, that told the legacy on. Through story, around campfires, they would tell these stories of great titans and gods that roamed Earth. They could simply be higher beings, extraterrestrials, or they could be divine, or both. But I think as mankind, we need to stop putting limits on what is possible in this world. The simple notion that Gaia, Mother Nature, creator of all, is a living, breathing organism in itself is absolutely fantastical. Yes, our planet has a consciousness. Our planet is alive. It is a living organism. And when you abuse her and when you treat her like crap, she will fight back. She will preserve her survival, and so will the higher beings. The giants, they were abominations. They were evil, and the sin on earth was great at these times. The fallen, the watchers, the Anunnaki, much sin, much evil, and that's kind of the way it's going at the moment. She even creates her own organic supercomputer that creates life and influences life, opens the 7 chakras, while the evil side send in the same stuff, but it only opens 3 chakras. Head, life, and sexual chakra, instead of all 7. That's why society is going the way it is. Back in Atlantean times, the Atlanteans were persuaded with technology and convinced by evil extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki and the gray aliens. They were convinced to open a portal. And when they opened the Stargate in the universe, the Anunnaki and the Greys sent in meteors. They were full of the evil black goo and black stones. These evil black stones convince people and sway them towards the evil. That's why it's only 3 chakras: head, life, and sexual chakra. They lose the heart chakra, empathy. And if there's ever been a time where there was lack of empathy, it's now. The story goes in World War II that a German SS soldier went into a mine shaft and he found these black rocks. They would later find out they were meteorites. He took them back to base where a certain leader came into contact with him, lost all empathy, and wiped out an entire civilization of people. This stuff is real, people. It is here. So open your hearts. All right, y'all. So my boy is back at it again. For those of you that don't know, I got a source who lives in Cali whose grandfather and father hailed from Mexico. They share stories, and they shared their folklore with him. And what he says about the giants, y'all. Come on. Here we go. So his grandfather would say that there's 5 different types of giants that have inhabited Earth. And of these 5 different types of giants, 2 were evil. He would explain the largest giants to ever inhabit Earth would walk from land to land through the oceans. The deepest of waters would come up to the majority of their shoulders, but the biggest of all, it would only come up to their waist. His grandfather didn't know much about these giants because they were the oldest. These giants would die off, and there were very few left even before the first Great Earth War. That they were full of energy and they were highly intelligent. So much so that they became one with Mother Nature. That they were pure, nothing but love and light. that they were so in tune with Mother Nature and Mother Earth that upon their deaths, they would become island chains or mountain ranges. Sicilian folklore about giants explain the same thing, but they did have conflicts, and many of those conflicts led to a lot of their demise. The second type of giants, and the second tallest, ranged from 20 to 40 feet tall. These giants were dumb and generally overweight. Not only would they eat each other, but they would eat humans as well. They would literally destroy everything in their path, and were easily manipulated and bribed by evil factions on Earth. His grandfather would say that these giants were clumsy and slow, easily killed by a fast opponent. Literally abominations. This brings us to the third type. The third group of giants were 20 to 30 feet tall. They were blue and they had horns, massive goat horns, and that they loved to party. These giants were good-natured and generally didn't like violence. They were highly intelligent and had the power to heal. They had a few warriors to protect them, but other than that, they were not a violent faction. His grandfather would say that these giants had the sacred knowledge of old. When the Great Earth Wars came, they didn't want to partake and they didn't want to fight, but they would provide healing for the good factions. And their warriors that did fight were super fast and were absolute killing machines. This made me think of Norse mythology and the frost giants of old. But this brings us to the fourth type. There will be a part 2. If you want to see the fourth and fifth types, check out my live. The fourth group of giants were 15 to 30 feet tall. They had eagle or reptilian legs, were sometimes green, and had wings. Book of Enoch, anybody? The Fallen? They were so evil, they loved to eat humans, especially offspring. These beings possessed evil magical powers, so much so that when they would walk through Mother Nature, everything around them and behind them would die. They would lure in men and women and control them with their black magic. With their flying abilities, they were a force to be reckoned with. They almost looked angelic. His grandfather would go on to state that they were so evil that they could be killed with water and dirt when shoved in their mouth. That's how out of tune their energy was with Mother Nature. The fifth group of giants were 15 to 30 feet tall. These were our ancient ancestors, and they looked just like us. They were inherently good, and they wanted to help mankind succeed. They hail from all over the world, and they hailed from a time when our ancestors were just actually that tall. At this time, before the Third Earth War, the nations were all love and light. They were in tune with Mother Nature. The Great Flood pushed them into the subterranean pockets, where it is said today some of them have been kept cryogenically frozen in crystalline-like structures. It's even believed by some that they're awakening today. This is the legend of the Kandahar Giant and his encounter with U.S. Special Forces. It was 2002 in Kandahar during the war in Afghanistan, when a U.S. Special Forces unit that specialized in rescue missions was called to duty. Their mission? To find a unit that seemed to have just vanished deep within the mountains. They wasted no time and began moving as they wanted to be back before nightfall. According to an eyewitness that was part of the Special Forces unit, they had trekked 4 miles up the side of the mountain, and they were almost to the last pinpointed location of the lost unit when they began finding broken military equipment strewn about all throughout the mountains. That's when they looked up and noticed a massive cave. As they approached the cave, they noticed a rancid smell and began seeing body parts laying all over the ground. When all of a sudden, an 18-foot-tall giant flew out of the cave, spearing one of their men. Stunned, the unit immediately opens fire, letting them have it. It was a monster, the witness explained. You could see in your peripherals the bodies stacked up at the cave entrance. This led us to believe he was a cannibal, with a red beard and scarlet red long hair covering his shoulders, and Dan, whose body lay limp at the end of his spear. As I noticed he had 6 fingers and toes, the lieutenant yells fire, snapping me back to reality. We began shooting the beast, quickly noticing the bullets were having little effect. The beast tosses Dan 30 feet off the end of the spear, as if nothing but a toy. He moved so swiftly, you would never believe he was actually as big as he was. Wielding his spear, he began barreling towards us with bloodthirsty rage on his face. And as if instinct kicked in all at once, we all yelled out, "Aim for the head!" The team was carrying an M4 submachine gun, a .308 sniper rifle, and a Barrett 50 caliber. Within seconds, he fell to the ground lifeless. And the team remembers the day they battled the Kandahar Giant, Part 3. The giant lay there dead. They radio back to base, and a chopper comes and picks it up. It weighed in about 1,200 pounds. This beast had a total of 12 fingers and 12 toes. And by witness account, it smelled like it hadn't bathed in probably 10 years. Nasty. And of course, standard procedure as they got back to the base, they made him sign a hush-hush agreement stating that the world wasn't ready for this info. The witness who shared this story felt that the people should know and that there was no reason to keep us in the dark. At the end of the day, I know this is hard for some of you to believe, but giants have been in our history since the Bible, the biblical days. The Nephilim are fallen angels that came down and bred with humans. This enhanced our race. That being said, I ain't telling you gotta believe shit. Believe what you want. And one guy promised he was 22 feet as well. His body is in Ohio. Tune in next time. All right, fam, you're gonna want to hear this one. A couple days ago, a soldier with the highest security clearance sent me a message on my TikTok. In his message, he would state that he might know why Biden left Afghanistan the way he did. Intrigued, I said, please explain. He disclosed that he had top secret security clearance and that it was his second tour in Afghanistan. He was a radio technician and he would fix the broken comms soldiers would bring back to the FOB, or the Forward Operating Base. While in the Middle East, he would work with the best spec ops teams in the military. From MARSOC, which is U.S. Marine Corps Special Forces, to the SEALs, the Rangers, and the British Marines. And about 7 months ago is when he got back from his last tour. It was around the time that Biden first took office, and the same time when something would take place that made U.S. forces decide it wasn't worth being there. And here is why. Viewer discretion advised. He was nearing the end of his tour when one of his SEAL buddies brought back a bunch of broken radios. After a mission where his team would take on 60% casualties, which was highly unusual in Afghanistan at this time. And they had been sent out on a patrol in the surrounding hills and mountains. They were in the Kandahar region of Afghanistan. Officially, his buddy would tell him they got attacked by a platoon-sized element of the Taliban. But for some reason, he could sense that he wasn't hearing the entirety of the story. Well, lucky for our technician, he had recently snuck booze into the wire. And he would end up getting drunk with the SEAL team member for 6 nights straight. And on the very last night of drinking together, the SEAL team member, out of the blue, would say you can't tell anybody about this. And the shit he's about to say should never be repeated. Our whistleblower would explain that the SEAL team member wouldn't go into gritty detail. He assumed it was either because he hadn't processed it yet, or someone forcibly told him not to tell a soul. During the mission, we would come up on a cave that was supposed to be a hostile outpost. But as they approached the outpost in the cave, they suddenly heard screaming inside. They then proceeded to a vantage point where they could get a better view out of sight of any enemy combatants. When they finally got in position and glanced down into the cave, they couldn't believe their eyes. It was a giant standing anywhere from 16 to 20 feet tall, fighting the Taliban. He was crushing them limb from limb, tossing them around like rag dolls, killing one after another after another. The men were in shock. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. They would watch for about 30 seconds and then decide it would be smart to take a tactical withdrawal. But as they were backing up, the giant would spot one of them. And with swift speed, he would pursue and be on top of them in seconds. He would engage and kill 3 of them immediately. So quickly, one of them called air support from an A-10. By the time the bombs buried the beast, he killed 8 SEALs and corpsmen. Wounding 2, but they survived. They were told to keep quiet because of backlash. Shortly after this incident, we would decide to make a hasty withdrawal. This would be the second time U.S. soldiers would battle a giant from Kandahar. Alright, y'all, there seems to be some confusion on my Kandahar Giant 2.0 video. Apparently, I should have been more clear. I figured because I said Biden and everything happened in 2021, people would be smart enough to put 2 and 2 together. This was a separate account from the original Kandahar Giant story that took place in 2001. This took place earlier this year, 2021. And I know people find it hard to believe, as that's why we pull out of Afghanistan, but they might know something more to the story. End of the day, it would make total sense as to why they left the military equipment. It's so they could protect themselves against said entities. And why they left so abruptly. Who knows? There might be a bunch of them. If there's one, there's many more. I'm not using a story from 2001 and now. Whole separate account. In 2014, there was a lawsuit filed against the Smithsonian Museum. It alleged that they have been withholding, even destroying evidence that giants ever existed on this planet. The Supreme Court ruled that they declassified documents back to 1900. Here's some of what they released. Reported back in 2015, a large giant was unearthed in Australia. It was said that this is the world's largest giant ever unearthed. Found near Ayers Rock, the skeleton is said to be 17 feet 4 inches tall. But shortly after unearthing, Professor Hans Zimmer was forced to hand it over to the government, and there has been no further reporting since. The next giant takes us to Pennsylvania. Reported in the Oil City Times in 1870 near West Hickory, Pennsylvania, the unearthing of arguably the largest giant ever found. This massive hominid stood at 18 feet tall. On October 7th, 1895, a newspaper named The World reported that one of the largest giants ever unearthed had been found. The mummified remains stood 9 feet tall. It is said to be known by locals as the place of the giants, since its discovery in 2002 by the Pentagon using geodesic satellite radar. They discovered large caverns cut right into the side of a mountain with no visible entrances at the surface. They were beings that seemed to have mastered technologies even more advanced than today's. The walls of these tunnels were smooth like polished marble. They start in the mountain at an even slope and then make a cut at a perfect 26-degree angle. This would lead up to a central room with a height of 30 meters tall and 100 meters wide. Lined up along both the left and the right walls were tables with a height of no less than 6 feet. On these tables were all types of ancient cuneiform writing, while there were some that were more familiar, like circles and triangles. On other tables, there seemed to be some sort of consoles with all sorts of cables coming out of them. These consoles could design holographic images based on scientific information. Welcome to the Busegi Mountains of Romania. Was an underground city of giants discovered in the Grand Canyon? In the early 1900s, G.E. Kincaid was journeying down the Colorado River in a wooden boat alone looking for mineral. He was some 42 miles up the river from the El Tovar Crystal Canyon. When on the east wall of the canyon, Kincaid spotted stains in the sedimentary formation. They were located approximately 2,000 feet above the riverbed. There were no trails leading up to the location, but after a long hike, he finally made it to his destination. And much to his surprise, he discovered the mouth of a cave that was being hidden by a rock shelf so you couldn't see it from the river. As he approached the entrance, Kincaid noticed steps that led 30 yards down the side of the canyon. He concluded that where these steps ended must have been the water level at the time these caves were last inhabited. As he'd make his way into the entrance, he'd notice hieroglyphs on the walls. These markings would pique his curiosity, so he decided to enter the cavern. During this first trip, he went several hundred feet into the main passage, until stumbling upon a crypt where he'd discover mummies, one of which he'd stand up, illuminate with his flashlight, and snap a picture. After gathering a number of relics, Kincaid would make his way back down the Colorado River to Yuma. From there, he sent the relics to Washington, explaining his discovery. This is when the Smithsonian would get involved and explorations would be undertaken. The main passageway was around 12 feet wide, but it would narrow to 9 feet towards the end of it. 57 feet from the entrance is where the first side passages would branch off. On both sides, there were a number of rooms about the size of an ordinary living room today, but some of the said rooms were almost 30 by 40 feet. These rooms had oval-shaped doors and were ventilated by round air spaces that went through the walls into the passages. These were believed to be the living quarters. The walls of the rooms were about 3 feet 6 inches in thickness. The tunnels were carved as straight and perfect as any engineer could plan. 100 feet from the entrance was the cross hall, which ran several hundred feet. It is here they would discover the idol, or the people's god, sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of the face seems oriental in origin, and it was carved by a very good hand. It is said that the attire is very well preserved, as was everything in the cavern at the time. Surrounding the idol were smaller ones, some beautiful in form, others depicting crooked necks and distortion, most likely representing good and evil. On the other end of the cross hall were tools and weapons made of copper. It's obvious these people knew the lost art of hardening such a metal. This method today is still sought by chemists and smiths. Along with these artifacts, they discover unique hieroglyphs, images like the ones you see here, depicting what seems to be a much larger human being handling a smaller one. Also discovered were urns and copper cups that originated from all over the planet. This has led experts to believe that multiple cultures may have been staying in this underground city. If this is the case, it's like nothing they have ever seen before. Another passageway would lead to a bunch of granaries, similar to that of Oriental temples. The granaries are rounded and seem to be constructed with an extra hard cement. On all the urns and surrounding all the doorways is the mysterious hieroglyphs. The origins at the time, they were not exactly sure where they came, but similar ones have been found in southern Arizona. The tomb the mummies were found in was one of the largest. It was so large that it actually had tiers, each level containing a number of mummies. The tombs were round and they had a little shelf out in front of them. These contained copper weapons and tools. The urns and weapons on the lower tiers of mummies were crude. As they got higher, they got more advanced, meaning that possibly this was around for generations. Upon excavation, they would realize that all the mummies in this chamber were male. They would come to the conclusion that these were the warriors of the tribe. But what struck the explorers as odd, among the discoveries, they would find no animal bones, skins, bedding, or clothing. Many of the rooms were bare except for water vessels. That being said, one of the largest rooms they would discover was 40 by 700 feet. It is assumed that this was the main dining hall where they would all gather to eat. Kincaid would go on to say that he believed these caverns could easily have housed up to 50,000 people. In his testimony, Kincaid would say there was one more place of interest. There was one chamber of which the passageway was not ventilated. And when they approached this said chamber, it was super dark and smelled of death. He would go on to say that their lights could not even pierce the gloom. And until better lighting was available, there was no way they could actually enter and discover what was in there. Some would rumor that it was just a room full of snakes, while others scoffed at this idea and believed that it was much more elaborate than that. What many don't know that G.E. Kincaid and S.A. Jordan, who was the Smithsonian director at the time, were actually following up the claims of an archaeologist that explored the region back in 1869. His name, John Wesley Powell. It's believed that it's possible that Powell discovered all of these said caverns before them. But this cannot be proven because it's said that during his expedition they saw a series of disasters, so all of his work was lost. So many scholars speculate that John Wesley Powell actually was able to explore the majority of these caverns. They also speculate that he may have named the high points in Haunted Canyon and Trinity Creek. Either that or he may have discovered the actual names of them. This is what lead many people to think that it's possible that multiple civilizations may have lived in these caverns. For example, the Shiva Temple, Tower of Ra. They also have the temples of Horus, Osiris, Isis, and the Tower of Set. These were all legendary figures of ancient Egypt and India, respectively. It's also good to note that Powell was actually the first director of the Smithsonian's Bureau of Ethnology. Along with that, he was the original founder of the National Geographic Society and a member of the Cosmos Club. There is a cave in the canyon named after him. Though it has not been proven, many scholars believe that based on the hieroglyphs and some of the idols within the caves, that the said caves were actually inhabited by giants, and that these giants may have even had humans as slaves, while others believe that the humans were not their slaves and that they all lived in harmony. But based on the elaborate megalithic structures and that the in-depth labor and work it would have took to build these caverns almost 1,600 meters into the mountain, that it was done by super advanced civilizations that were anywhere from 10 to 12 feet tall. So what happened to them? A notable legend is that of the Hopi Indians. Their legend states that their ancestors once lived in an underworld within the Grand Canyon, until a disconnection rose between the good and the bad, the people of one heart and the people of two hearts. As a result, Machado, who was their chief, counseled the people of one hearts to leave the caverns, but there was no way out. He then planted a tree, causing it to grow and pierce the roof of the underworld, so that the group of one heart could get out, and they did. They would then move up the river to Colorado, where they would plant grain and corn, establishing their new civilization. Today, this portion of the Grand Canyon is cut off to the public, and those that try to infiltrate will be met with armed guards. They've even gone as far as to establish a no-fly zone over the area. And it's not only the government that's involved, NASA is supposedly involved too. If let out, this would change the origins of the Egyptian cultures as we know it, changing the notion that these people couldn't travel by sea. So why did these people resort to the underground tunnels? Was it the flood or something else? Alright, y'all, so my boy is back at it again. For those of you that don't know, I got a source who lives in Cali whose grandfather and father hailed from Mexico. They share stories, and they shared their folklore with him. And what he says about the giants, y'all, come on, here we go. So his grandfather would say that there's 5 different types of giants that have inhabited Earth. And of these 5 different types of giants, 2 were evil. He would explain the largest giants to ever inhabit Earth would walk from land to land through the oceans. The deepest of waters would come up to the majority of their shoulders, but the biggest of all, it would only come up to their waist. His grandfather didn't know much about these giants because they were the oldest. These giants would die off, and there were very few left even before the first Great Earth War. That they were full of energy and they were highly intelligent. So much so that they became one with Mother Nature. That they were pure, nothing but love and light. That they were so in tune with Mother Nature and Mother Earth that upon their deaths they would become island chains or mountain ranges. Sicilian folklore about giants explain the same thing, but they did have conflicts, and many of those conflicts led to a lot of their demise. The second type of giants, and the second tallest, ranged from 20 to 40 feet tall. These giants were dumb and generally overweight. Not only would they eat each other, but they would eat humans as well. They would literally destroy everything in their path, and were easily manipulated and bribed by evil factions on Earth. His grandfather would say that these giants were clumsy and slow, easily killed by a fast opponent. Literally abominations. This brings us to the third type. The third group of giants were 20 to 30 feet tall. They were blue and they had horns, massive goat horns, and that they loved to party. These giants were good-natured and generally didn't like violence. They were highly intelligent and had the power to heal. They had a few warriors to protect them, but other than that, they were not a violent faction. His grandfather would say that these giants had the sacred knowledge of old. When the Great Earth Wars came, they didn't want to partake and they didn't want to fight, but they would provide healing for the good factions. And their warriors that did fight were super fast and were absolute killing machines. This made me think of Norse mythology and the frost giants of old. But this brings us to the fourth type. The fourth group of giants were 15 to 30 feet tall. They had eagle or reptilian legs, were sometimes green, and had wings. Book of Enoch, anybody? The Fallen? They were so evil, they loved to eat humans, especially offspring. These beings possessed evil magical powers, so much so that when they would walk through Mother Nature, everything around them and behind them would die. They would lure in men and women and control them with their black magic. With their flying abilities, they were a force to be reckoned with. They almost looked angelic. His grandfather would go on to state that they were so evil that they could be killed with water and dirt when shoved in their mouth. That's how out of tune their energy was with Mother Nature. The fifth group of giants were 15 to 30 feet tall. These were our ancient ancestors, and they looked just like us. They were inherently good, and they wanted to help mankind succeed. They hail from all over the world, and they hailed from a time when our ancestors were just actually that tall. At this time, before the Third Earth War, the nations were all love and light. They were in tune with Mother Nature. The Great Flood pushed them into the subterranean pockets, where it is said today some of them have been kept cryogenically frozen in crystalline-like structures. It's even believed by some that they're awakening today. So in the book of Enoch in chapter 7, it states that the fallen came down and bred with the daughters of men. They took unto themselves wives and chose one for each himself. And they 3 became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells. Now if you don't know what ell means, elbow to hand. That's a unit of measure they used back then. In certain societies, the length an ell represented differed, ranging from what is commonly known as 18 inches. But as I looked it up, the average from the French to the Scottish was well over 2 feet. The Scottish, 54 inches was an ell. So I've been looking into Norse and Greek mythology, and they talk about Zeus, the son of Cronus. Cronus was a titan, and he ate all of his children in fear that they would overthrow his throne. Cronus' wife, Rhea, grew angry over this, so she decided to take one of his sons and hide him. His name was Zeus, and he was hid and raised on Crete Island. So a while back, I remember doing a video on Crete Island and how there was a lot of giants' remains found there. The remains found ranged anywhere from 40 feet up to 72 feet in length. And I also read that there was a lot of giant activity around Sardinia, so I began looking on Google Earth to check it out. Crete Island, Sardinia. And here's what I found on the ocean floor next to Sardinia. All of these, what look like footsteps. I'm saying if you took a regular person and told them to take steps and multiple steps on the beach in clay or sand and then mimic them, these will line up pretty close to the same steps and foot patterns as what a human would lay. So I humored the idea and thought, well, maybe it was a giant. And here's what I found. Upon zooming in and using the measurement tool on Google Earth, one of those footsteps was 4,625 feet. There's more. And these footprints appeared all over, up the coast of Africa, all through the Mediterranean. You could find these footprints. And what's more amazing, I found some that strided out. Stride, 10.4 miles. So I guess what I'm saying is, could these footprints have been left by a Titan? Possibly even Cronus. And my boy Mini Minuteman, who criticized me about finding footprints on the ocean floor 2.1 miles deep, no, he didn't need a snorkel. He was over 2 miles tall. And his feet print, much larger than 7 feet. The stories of the Titans, I believe, is true, and they were massive beyond belief. Poseidon, said to be a giant god of the sea. Could they be his feet print? God of the sea, he could travel through all the oceans without even having to go underwater. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but it did say in the book of Enoch, 3,000 ells. When doing the math, that ranged from the smallest 4,500 feet to up to 12,500 feet. So before I continue, smash that like button, hit the bell, and subscribe to my page for more content like this. I know some of the stuff I post can seem far-fetched, but rather than disregard these people that are telling these stories in ancient times as total quacks, why not take them seriously? Why not legitimize them? This is how they knew how to relay what they experienced. Today, if there was a flood, everything would be gone. Everything. Record of everything we have. But what would be left? Certain people that lived that told the legacy on. Through story, around campfires, they would tell these stories of great titans and gods that roamed Earth. They could simply be higher beings, extraterrestrials, or they could be divine, or both. But I think as mankind, we need to stop putting limits on what is possible in this world. The simple notion that Gaia, Mother Nature, creator of all, is a living, breathing organism in itself is absolutely fantastical. Yes, our planet has a consciousness. Our planet is alive. It is a living organism. And when you abuse her and when you treat her like crap, she will fight back. She will preserve her survival. And so will the higher beings. The giants, they were abominations. They were evil. And the sin on earth was great at these times. The fallen, the watchers, the Anunnaki, much sin, much evil. And that's kind of the way it's going at the moment. She even creates her own organic supercomputer that creates life and influences life, opens the 7 chakras, while the evil side send in the same stuff, but it only opens 3 chakras, head, life, and sexual chakra, instead of all 7. That's why society is going the way it is. Back in Atlantean times, the Atlanteans were persuaded with technology and convinced by evil extraterrestrials, the Anunnaki and the gray aliens. They were convinced to open a portal. And when they opened the Stargate in the universe, the Anunnaki and the Greys sent in meteors. They were full of the evil black goo and black stones. These evil black stones convince people and sway them towards the evil. That's why it's only 3 chakras, head, life, and sexual chakra. They lose the heart chakra, empathy. And if there's ever been a time where there was lack of empathy, it's now. The story goes in World War II that a German SS soldier went into a mine shaft and he found these black rocks. They would later find out they were meteorites. He took them back to base where a certain leader came into contact with him, lost all empathy, and wiped out an entire civilization of people. This stuff is real, people. It is here. So open your heart. This is the legend of the Kandahar Giant and his encounter with U.S. Special Forces. It was 2002 in Kandahar during the war in Afghanistan, when a U.S. Special Forces unit that specialized in rescue missions was called to duty. Their mission? To find a unit that seemed to have just vanished deep within the mountains. They wasted no time and began moving as they wanted to be back before nightfall. According to an eyewitness that was part of the Special Forces unit, they had trekked 4 miles up the side of the mountain, and they were almost to the last pinpointed location of the lost unit when they began finding broken military equipment strewn about all throughout the mountains. That's when they looked up and noticed a massive cave. As they approached the cave, they noticed a rancid smell and began seeing body parts laying all over the ground. When all of a sudden, an 18-foot-tall giant flew out of the cave, spearing one of their men. Stunned, the unit immediately opens fire, letting them have it. He was a monster, the witness explained. You could see in your peripherals the bodies stacked up at the cave entrance. This led us to believe he was a cannibal. With a red beard and scarlet red long hair covering his shoulders, and Dan, whose body lay limp at the end of his spear. As I noticed he had 6 fingers and toes, the lieutenant yells fire, snapping me back to reality. We began shooting the beast, quickly noticing the bullets were having little effect. The beast tosses Dan 30 feet off the end of the spear, as if nothing but a toy. He moved so swiftly, you would never believe he was actually as big as he was. Wielding his spear, he began barreling towards us with bloodthirsty rage on his face. And as if instinct kicked in all at once, we all yelled out, "Aim for the head!" The team was carrying an M4 submachine gun, a .308 sniper rifle, and a Barrett 50 caliber. Within seconds, he fell to the ground lifeless. And the team remembers the day they battled the Kandahar Giant. So as the giant lay there dead, they radio back to base, and a chopper comes and picks it up. It weighed in about 1,200 pounds. This beast had a total of 12 fingers and 12 toes. And by witness account, it smelled like it hadn't bathed in probably 10 years. Nasty. And of course, standard procedure as they got back to the base, they made him sign a hush-hush agreement, stating that the world wasn't ready for this info. The witness who shared this story felt that the people should know, and that there was no reason to keep us in the dark. At the end of the day, I know this is hard for some of you to believe, but giants have been in our history since the Bible, the biblical days. The Nephilim are fallen angels that came down and bred with humans. This enhanced our race. That being said, I ain't telling you gotta believe shit. Believe what you want. And one guy promised he was 22 feet as well. His body is in Ohio. In 2014, there was a lawsuit filed against the Smithsonian Museum. It alleged that they have been withholding, even destroying evidence that giants ever existed on this planet. The Supreme Court ruled that they declassified documents back to 1900. Here's some of what they released. Reported back in 2015, a large giant was unearthed in Australia. It was said that this is the world's largest giant ever unearthed. Found near Ayers Rock, the skeleton is said to be 17 feet 4 inches tall. But shortly after unearthing, Professor Hans Zimmer was forced to hand it over to the government, and there has been no further reporting since. The next giant takes us to Pennsylvania. Reported in the Oil City Times in 1870 near West Hickory, Pennsylvania, the unearthing of arguably the largest giant ever found. This massive hominid stood at 18 feet tall. On October 7th, 1895, a newspaper named The World reported that one of the largest giants ever unearthed had been found. The mummified remains stood 9 feet tall. Could the recent discovery of a massive fossilized skull rewrite human history as we know it? The specimen found was allegedly wrapped up and placed in an abandoned well over 90 years ago. The skull, which you see here, was originally discovered in 1933 by Chinese laborers building a bridge over the Songao River in Harbin, which is located in China's northernmost province, Heilongjiang. At the time of the discovery, this area of China was under Japanese occupation. So to keep it from falling into the wrong hands, they wrapped it up and placed it in an abandoned well. It would resurface in 2018, only after the man who hid it told his grandson on his deathbed about it. Shortly after retrieving the unique specimen, the grandson would turn it into the proper authorities for research. They estimate this massive humanoid roamed the earth 140,000 to 300,000 years ago. What makes it unique is that it contains characteristics of both primitive and modern humans. So could this rewrite the history of mankind? Isn't it obvious what took place? Check out the skulls above me. You have the skull of a modern human, a Neanderthal, and a Denisovan. This skull was recently pulled out of a well in China. Scientists are baffled because it has characteristics of humans and Neanderthals. And its cranium, which is the housing of the brain, is 9 inches long and 6 inches wide. So it's slightly elongated. So the book of Enoch says what? God smited the fallen angels
for coming down to Earth and influencing humans negatively. So it hit me. Could the elongated skull people be the fallen angels? Could they have come down from the skies and bred with mankind? To me, it looks like a resounding yes. They came from the skies, bred with the Neanderthals. You get Denisovans, who also became giants. And I believe where they came from is possibly Mars, the red planet with no water. They ravaged their planet with nuclear war and space jumped to Earth.
It is said to be known by locals as the place of the giants, since its discovery in 2002 by the Pentagon using geodesic satellite radar. They discovered large caverns cut right into the side of a mountain with no visible entrances at the surface. They were beings that seemed to have mastered technologies even more advanced than today's. The walls of these tunnels were smooth like polished marble. They start in the mountain at an even slope and then make a cut at a perfect 26-degree angle. This would lead up to a central room with a height of 30 meters tall and 100 meters wide. Lined up along both the left and the right walls were tables with a height of no less than 6 feet. On these tables were all types of ancient cuneiform writing, while there were some that were more familiar, like circles and triangles. On other tables, there seemed to be some sort of consoles with all sorts of cables coming out of them. These consoles could design holographic images based on scientific information. Welcome to the Busegi Mountains of Romania. This is Sarah Winnemucca's detailed account of the Paiute tribe of Nevada's encounter with the red-haired giants of North America. The Paiute people would refer to them as Sateka, meaning tule eaters. Tule is a water plant that grows in the marshes across North America. They would then use this plant to weave large rafts of which they would navigate Humboldt Lake with. They would also use them to flee surprise attacks from the Paiute people. And lastly, they would use them to capture the Paiute women as they gathered tule near the lake. Her chronicle states that after 3 years of blood-weary battles, a coalition of regional tribes would finally gather to take on this savage enemy. The allied tribes finally bravely pushed the giants back into Lovelock Caves. Then they would quickly cover the entrance with brush piles and set them ablaze. The giants would suffocate and any escapees would get bombarded with arrows. This would be the last of the red-haired giants. It's said that this dress, which is one of a kind, is made out of the red-haired giant's hair. Alright fam, you're gonna want to hear this one. A couple days ago, a soldier with the highest security clearance sent me a message on my TikTok. In his message, he would state that he might know why Biden left Afghanistan the way he did. Intrigued, I said, please explain. He disclosed that he had top secret security clearance, and that it was his second tour in Afghanistan. He was a radio technician, and he would fix the broken comms soldiers would bring back to the FOB, or the Forward Operating Base. While in the Middle East, he would work with the best spec ops teams in the military. From MARSOC, which is U.S. Marine Corps Special Forces, to the SEALs, the Rangers, and the British Marines. And about 7 months ago is when he got back from his last tour. It was around the time that Biden first took office, and the same time when something would take place that made U.S. forces decide it wasn't worth being there. And here is why. Viewer discretion advised. He was nearing the end of his tour when one of his SEAL buddies brought back a bunch of broken radios. After a mission where his team would take on 60% casualties, which was highly unusual in Afghanistan at this time. And they had been sent out on a patrol in the surrounding hills and mountains. They were in the Kandahar region of Afghanistan. Officially, his buddy would tell him they got attacked by a platoon-sized element of the Taliban. But for some reason, he could sense that he wasn't hearing the entirety of the story. Well, lucky for our technician, he had recently snuck booze into the wire. And he would end up getting drunk with the SEAL team member for 6 nights straight. And on the very last night of drinking together, the SEAL team member, out of the blue, would say you can't tell anybody about this. And the shit he's about to say should never be repeated. Our whistleblower would explain that the SEAL team member wouldn't go into gritty detail. He assumed it was either because he hadn't processed it yet, or someone forcibly told him not to tell a soul. During the mission, we would come up on a cave that was supposed to be a hostile outpost. But as they approached the outpost in the cave, they suddenly heard screaming inside. They then proceeded to a vantage point where they could get a better view out of sight of any enemy combatants. When they finally got in position and glanced down into the cave, they couldn't believe their eyes. It was a giant standing anywhere from 16 to 20 feet tall, fighting the Taliban. He was crushing them limb from limb, tossing them around like rag dolls, killing one after another after another. The men were in shock. They couldn't believe what they were witnessing. They would watch for about 30 seconds and then decide it would be smart to take a tactical withdrawal. But as they were backing up, the giant would spot one of them. And with swift speed, he would pursue and be on top of them in seconds. He would engage and kill 3 of them immediately. So quickly, one of them called air support from an A-10. By the time the bombs buried the beast, he killed 8 SEALs and corpsmen. Wounding 2, but they survived. They were told to keep quiet because of backlash. Shortly after this incident, we would decide to make a hasty withdrawal. This would be the second time U.S. soldiers would battle a giant from Kandahar.
This clip is said to be a giant. This was filmed somewhere in the Middle East, and if you take a good look, this giant was standing next to a tank. It's now looked like it's disappearing into the ground. We're gonna play it again. Tell me what you think. Compare the size of the giant to the tank. I can't help but to think of Nightgod 333 posting recently more sightings of the Kandahar giant and a possible reason why we could have left.
U.S. Special Forces encountered giants in Antarctica. You heard it here first. It was the early 2000s, right around the same time as the Kandahar giant, when a team of Navy SEALs was called to Antarctica. Their mission was to plunge deep into the ice shelf and explore ruins recently discovered by ground-penetrating radar. Upon arrival at the site, they would begin their descent down a large pre-drilled hole that would open up into a cavern. As soon as their boots hit the ground, they would quickly realize the cavern was actually a massive megalithic structure. The structures were thousands of years old, and they believed them to be built by the ancient builder race, the same ones that built the pyramids. Amazed, they began exploring, eventually stumbling upon a large door. One of the SEALs would approach the door and touch it with his hand. To their surprise, it began shifting, almost as if powered by anti-gravity. The 30-foot door would move back and to the side, letting them into the corridor. In utter disbelief, they decide to split up into groups of 2. They cautiously make their way around the room, noticing hieroglyphs of which they had never seen before. As they sweep the area, senses heightened, one of the men yells, "Guys, come look at this!" As the rest of the team approaches this portion of the structure, they instantly notice the super advanced tech, and their comrades staring at a large crystal chamber. They brush a layer of frost off that has accumulated over thousands of years. And inside, they see it. It's approximately 14 to 16 feet tall. Its massive frame towering over the men. Its eyes still open, with a fierce look on its face, almost as if it's staring at them. The warm blood running through their veins turns cold. As it is said, when a soldier first experiences these beings, it changes them. They will never be the same, but some take it better than others. It is reported that some soldiers lose their head completely upon sight. They simply cannot handle it. They have to back out. Others' hair has turned completely gray in an instant. They are simply that afraid. As they're pondering over what they're looking at, one of the soldiers says, "Guys, check it out." They look over, and 2 of the chambers have already been broken through. These crystal chambers had them in a stasis, and they are now waking up. That's when the lead SEAL yells out, "All right, fellas, you know what time it is. On me." They hastily start swapping out the clips on their assault rifles. They've come prepared, as if they already knew what they were going to encounter. The rounds in these new magazines were something special. They weren't regular hollow point lead. They were actually made of pure copper, as the military and the Pentagon knew that pure copper is the only thing that kills these beasts. Using anything else is futile and will not hurt them. As they're finally getting locked and loaded, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they hear a cry. And no sooner do they turn around, one of the beasts flies from behind a megalith. It grabs one of the soldiers and slams him to the ground, killing him instantly. The second beast jumps from a ledge above, landing on another, squishing him to a pulp. "Fire, fire, fire!" They open up. The beasts run through the bullets as if they don't even touch them. The rest of the men scramble to take cover. They slide to cover and look back. They're gone. They move throughout the corridor swiftly and silently. So after shooting the giants with the pure copper rounds, they can tell it had an effect. They were slowed enough for the team to take cover behind a monument. And when they peek back around the edge to see where they're at, the giants are gone. So after taking a moment to gather themselves, they start heading down the opposite direction of the corridor. They stay within cover of the pillars running down the entire walkway, and they cover ground fairly quickly. They've covered probably close to a quarter mile. This cavern is huge. When suddenly they hear the 2 giants cry out. They turn around, and there they stand in the middle of the corridor. They begin trotting towards them and then full-on sprint. They're coming for them. The SEALs begin to engage their targets again. This time, they don't walk through it. They begin to slow in their run and eventually fall to the ground. The copper rounds work, and before long, they're laying there breathless. A sense of relief swarms over the team, but it was short-lived. As soon as the other two dropped, another cry. It was the third giant. It was out of its stasis. Move, move, move! The seals turn and begin running. They look back, see the giant running towards them, and continue. They can hear his footsteps, and then they just stop, and they turn to see where he's at. He's gone. It seems as if though he's almost playing with his food. They see another large doorway at the end of the hall, probably another quarter mile up. They're glancing around, looking for the giant. They can't see him. Then, as they're passing a section with large monuments on each side, one of the soldiers in the very back lets out a blood-curdling cry. The giant appears as if a blur from one side of the hallway to the other, and on the way through, he grabs another soldier. So he seems preoccupied with the said soldier for a little bit, grabbing his first out-of-stasis meal. The team approaches the doorway, and again it's being blocked off by a large stone slab. One of the soldiers notices a cutout in the rock wall, and they press it. It begins moving. The giant hears it. He looks up and starts their way, moving swiftly. Hold him off, fellas. Let's go. The team engages the target again. At this point, there's only 3 or 4 of them left, and the giant's running through the bullets as if they're nothing. It's not looking good when the group lead throws his gun down and reaches for a pouch on his vest. At this point, the door has finally slid open. It's within feet, and they dart through. The lead soldier turns around and chucks a grenade through the doorway. It's full of copper bearings. Take cover! They step behind the wall. The grenade goes off. Dozens of bearings hit the giant. He finally drops. They turn around to a massive cave system. They can't believe the size. They figure its total width is a couple miles. It is believed that the giants themselves and whoever created them had bored a tunnel. This tunnel ran from Antarctica all the way up to the Northwest Territories in Canada. They supposedly have a plasma drill that can drill up to 7 miles a day. This is what they use for travel. This large tunnel has smaller tunnels branching off of it, leading through the mountains, likely where all the missing hikers end up. The soldiers would eventually find their way to the surface, contact command. Most of them never spoke of it again.